When asked about the opinion of European nations towards Russia, according to most Russians, Germans and French have a fairly positive feelings of them. Ukrainians have a slightly worse impression, while the British and Americans have significantly worse views. However, according to Russians, Poles have the most negative attitude towards Russia. Let's examine how Russia's experiences, fueled by Kremlin propaganda, shaped the image of Poland as an enemy and revived nostalgia for the Soviet Empire. First and foremost, the emergence of the United States as the winner of the Cold War and the collapse of the USSR meant a humiliating fall from the status of a global superpower for Russians, especially because it did not occur without negative consequences for society. The loss of 1/6 of the territory after the dissolution of the USSR, a 50% contraction of the economy, poverty, and unemployment in the 1990s. Russians never accepted the status of a dependent partner and perceived themselves as unjustly pushed out of the role of being a leader in a significant part of the world. As Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, put it, Russians see their historical mission as being one of the major players on the international stage and providing assistance to the world. Therefore, when in 2014 Barack Obama referred to Russia as a regional power, it was perceived as a humiliation from the Russian perspective. The gradual departure of former allies, including countries of the former USSR, towards the West, is also seen by Russians as a threat to their own security. Historically, they view being a great power and a strong state as a necessary condition for survival, not a luxury. Such thinking is also one of the reasons for the ongoing sentiment among Russians towards the Soviet Union, and even towards Stalin. Perhaps the authorities were killing their own citizens, but we were a superpower. Since 1999, with the election of Vladimir Putin as president, there has been a notable resurgence of playing on this sentiment and nurturing a mentality filled with resentment from the Cold War defeat. The anti-Western rhetoric, ostentatious moves in military and foreign policy, as well as mobilization against the European Union and the United States, serve as tools for the Kremlin to maintain the legitimacy of the current political regime in the country. For Russian society, it is a form of psychological therapy, a way to prove to themselves that modern Russia is striving to regain the status of a great power and revise the consequences of the Cold War. Interestingly, this is also reflected in the increasing romanticization of the lost Soviet Empire. Over the past 20 years, the percentage of Russians who positively assess Stalin has been growing. In 2019, according to the independent Levada Center, 70% of Russians believed that Stalin played a positive role in the country's history. In 2006, it was less than 40%. Today, positive assessments prevail in all age groups. Similarly, in recent years, the percentage of Russians who consider their country to be a European nation has been declining. And once again, this is not limited to older people who remember the USSR. Young Russians identify the least with Europe. A significant portion of Russian propaganda targeting its own citizens feeds on these sentiments. Interestingly, a significant part of the anti-Western rhetoric is directed towards Poland. Professor Walenty Beluk points out that Russian neo-imperialism tries to combine the traditions of Tsarist and Bolshevik Russia, while Poland, with its own historical message and as a witness to crimes against the nations of Central and Eastern Europe, does not allow Moscow to play the historical card. One can recall, for example, the resolution of the European Parliament prepared in 2019, with the participation of Polish members of the European Parliament, officially acknowledging that both Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union shared responsibility for unleashing World War II through the signing of the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact in 1939. In light of this, Russia employs a tactic of exact reversal of accusations, creating its own alternative vision of history in which Poland and Germany are portrayed as the culprits of the outbreak of the war. By pointing to the Polish-German Non-Aggression Declaration of 1934, Poland is depicted as the country that first signed a pact with Hitler, referring to this document as the Pilsudski-Hitler Pact. All of this is also reflected in the popularized image of modern Poland, in which so-called historical pro-Nazi sympathies resurface. Additionally, pro-Kremlin television often portrays Poles as anti-Semites who, together with Hitler, mass-murdered Jews during the war, and depicts Poland as a country that is currently on the verge of fascism, hostile, and filled with hatred towards Russia. It can be mentioned that nearly 40% of Russians believe that Poland plans to invade and occupy parts of Belarus. In this worldview, Poles are seen as ungrateful traitors who, after receiving help from Russia, considered in Poland as a Soviet occupation, not only show no gratitude but have turned against their benefactors. Adding to this report, the most common source of knowledge about Poland for Russians is television. Importantly, this is not accompanied by any particular familiarity with Poland and its realities. For example, regarding the political system in Poland, 1/3 of Russians respond that it is a democracy, but a slightly smaller portion is convinced it is an authoritarian regime. The creators of the mentioned Russian Public Opinion Report assess that the average Russian's knowledge about Poland and its culture is limited, and still burdened by the opinions shaped in Soviet times. Communist propaganda often painted the image of Poland as a breeding ground for corrupt and arrogant bourgeoisie. Poles were portrayed as masters exploiting the working poor, especially the Belarusian and Ukrainian minorities who needed to be saved from the Poles. We can mention that in Russia, the word Polak is rarely used, but associations such as betrayal, treachery, cowardice arise. This not only refers to the interwar period when, in Russia's view, Poland treacherously took Ukraine and Belarus, but even further back to the 19th century when, for incomprehensible reasons to many Russians, the Poles fought against them on Napoleon's side. This sentiment once again found reflection in Soviet propaganda, presenting Poland as primarily driven by the desire to please the West. And let's don't forget that in the myth created in the USSR and still alive today, Russia perceives itself as the victor over fascism, which was created by the West, which remains a civilizational threat to them, contrasting with their own country, which is supposed to be a stronghold of world culture. This entire vision helps us understand how government-driven, patriotic propaganda, even when distorting reality, resonates well with the prejudices and sentiments of the citizens. That's why even if Russians oppose the authorities, they often believe in the Kremlin's constructed worldview. 2 weeks before the invasion of Ukraine, Maria Makievich from the Institute of Sociology of the Russian Academy of Sciences described that even among Russians who have a critical attitude towards the government and openly support opposition parties, there is an absolute prevalence of the belief that Russia is not responsible for the escalating tensions. They believe that Russia's actions are a response to aggression, and Russians are being forced into this conflict. In this perspective, even an armed invasion of Ukraine may seem justified to ordinary Russians, especially since the local media portrays it as an attack directed solely at the Nazi government of Ukraine and its army, while images of civilian bombardment are carefully deleted from the internet. On one hand, this helps us understand phenomena like the following. The former Ukrainian ambassador to Austria recently published the contents of a phone belonging to a deceased Russian soldier, revealing text messages from his wife saying, "Don't have mercy on them. They wouldn't have it for you." But at the same time, it opens up a certain opportunity. The attitude of many Russians stems from a distorted perception of reality. Therefore, it is possible to try to reach them with the truth. Many thanks to our patrons who allow us to cover more controversial topics. If you don't want to miss any future episodes, please allow notifications.